Hi, I'm David Goforth with the Cooperative Extension Successful Gardener. Occasionally I have people ask me about plants in the wild that are edible. I do find this an interesting way of relating to nature. If you find a plant and you know that's edible and taste it, it's a different sense that you're using with nature, and a lot of us are fairly nature deficient to begin with. I'm going to show you a few plants today, but first I want to give you a little bit of a caution. Make sure with any plant that you're positive of your identification. I normally recommend people take a look at least 2 different references, and with at least one of the references using a scientific name. In addition to being careful about what you're eating, you need to be careful about where you're collecting it. You need to have permission to collect it, plus you need to make sure that there's no pesticides been sprayed in the area or herbicides or things like that that you could ingest along with the wild food that you're eating. Finally, I would encourage you to collect responsibly and not take the last of anything, to leave a portion for both wildlife and for reproduction. But if you'll take those cautions, it may be an interesting hobby to develop. This is one of the trees here that I'm going to mention. This tree is not likely that you would be able to do this because it's fairly uncommon in Cabarrus County, but there are places where this tree, the southern sugar maple, is here in Cabarrus County. And of course with the southern sugar maple, what you can do is you can tap it for maple syrup. And this is what I've done down here. The tapping for maple syrup is not very common in this area. It's something they normally do above Massachusetts. Massachusetts on up, Maine, Canada, those areas are where most of the maple syrups come from. But if you wanted to tap this southern sugar maple, here's what I've done. I've taken and used a drink bottle here instead of a pail. It's that way I didn't spend any money with it. And with the drink bottle, I've just taken a piece of twine here, tie a square knot here, an overhand knot up here, and that way I can loop it over a nail that's driven in right here. This is where I've drilled a hole in here with a small, you can see small as my little finger, hole in here. It could be just a little bit bigger than this. And I've used some, actually this is irrigation pipe that I've salvaged somewheres, and I pushed it into the tree and made it snug in there, put the drink bottle that I've salvaged here on top of it, and then the whole thing up with a little string here. Unfortunately, this nail is gets held fast in here by the end of the season, and you really can't take it out. So I'm sure my grandsons someday will probably be cursing me because the nail that I've left in the tree here is one reason I wouldn't do it in a home. The other reason is because you'll get a little bit of decay around this injury right here over time. And so the following year, you wouldn't want to put the hole in the same place. They say move over about 2 or 3 inches, up and down at least 5 inches to get to a new site. You can actually see the site where I tapped it last year right here. We generally start tapping here, I'm not sure exactly when to start. I normally start at the new year. Up north they will wait on over into February, but that's definitely way too late here. You need to start at least as early as January the 1st, and it will continue to drip sap over several weeks until it finally stops. Then you can remove your system at that time. This actual sap needs to be boiled down, and I would suggest doing that outside. Do it outside on a camp stove myself. If you get it inside the house, particularly with wallpaper, you could damage wallpaper because you're actually boiling off about 40 times what you're actually getting. So in other words, a drink bottle full here would boil down to about 3 ounces of actual maple syrup. You'd want to boil your syrup down till it's a little bit thinner than what you might be familiar with corn syrup. One way you could do it would be to go into Walmart and look at their pure maple syrup and see how thin it is in the store. What I've seen in the grocery stores is USA Grade A amber, and I've cooked down some that's been a little bit lighter than that, and I've cooked some that's been a little bit darker than that. But you'd want to cook it down to about that consistency, and it takes a while to get that done, so a lot of steam is coming off while you're cooking this down. So I've never quite got the efficiencies that they're getting farther north as far as tapping a tree and quite getting that amount out of a single tap. But I've still got 1.5 gallons of maple syrup that I've cooked down this year so far. And so it's sort of interesting to do. Let's move on and look at another plant that I find interesting. This plant is Creasy, or Creasy greens is the common name you'll hear for it around here. It's also called upland cress, and you can actually buy seeds of this, and I saw some of it on the Kannapolis Farmers Market this past summer. But you can also find it growing wild, like this is growing wild right here. It's an interesting plant to me for one reason, because back in the early 60s and 70s, there was a requirement in the Boy Scout book that you find a wild plant and prepare it and eat it. And this is one of the wild plants that was commonly used in the troop that I belonged to. They went and redid that requirement in the early 70s, so most boys are not doing that anymore. But this was one that we did back then. And typically we would take and boil it in water and then fry it like you would do most greens. To harvest this one here, you would take and just cut the entire plant like that. And then you could bring it in and wash it and prepare it. This is a little bit beyond the point where it is most flavorful. In fact, the stems have probably got a little bit woody by now. You'd normally get this earlier in the year when you would harvest some of your other greens, such as turnip greens or mustard greens. In fact, this is a member of the same family and has got some of the same value, nutritional value. A lot of the B vitamins and minerals such as calcium and magnesium are very prominent in this plant here and very useful for that purpose. So a plant that most people would find fairly tasty. It's a little bit more bitter than, say, a collards, perhaps more like your mustard greens than it would be collards. But again, in our American palate, we seem to be a little bit scared of bitter, but most cultures, such as the Italian culture, they don't mind things being a little bit more bitter. And so a person could take the smaller parts here and use it in a salad, as a microgreen salad or something like that. But you'll find it more typically boiled, and then you can eat it at that stage, or you can come back and fry it and eat it at that stage. In addition to this plant, there's another plant out here I want to show you that you may very well find in your yard. This plant is called chickweed, or common chickweed, and it's fairly easy to identify with the deltoid-shaped leaves and the stems laying down like they do, and the succulent stems like you've got right here. So chickweed is fairly common. It will bloom white a little bit later in the year, and it will taste pretty good all winter long, fairly mild taste that we would typically eat with a salad. I think you can cook it lightly, but most of the time people will eat it just like this right here, take and eat it fresh in a salad. This one has some B vitamins in it and is a very good nutritional green that you can find during the cold winter months, such as seeing it here in January and February. There's been some around since November, December, January, and February. So one that people are very common with, and one that really tastes fairly mild and is fairly easy to get used to the taste. Well, those are three interesting plants that I will occasionally gather from the wild. If you decide to gather a plant from the wild, make sure that you know the scientific name and make sure that you have a positive identification, and go with more than one reference. One individual can sometimes be confused about what's edible and what's not edible, and some of these wild plants can kill you if you get the wrong one. Also, make sure that you're not getting plants that have been sprayed with herbicides. Make sure you have permission to gather the plants that you're gathering. And finally, make sure that you leave some both for wildlife and for future seed. If you have any questions about plants, give me a call at the office. And until next time, plan and plant for a better world.